This video might be the most important video you see on health, so you need to pause everything and listen to this with 100% intention. What we're talking about is the concept of epigenetics, which basically means that you can modify the way your genes express themselves without actually changing your genes. So let's say I'm genetically predisposed to hair loss or to cancer. Even if that's in my DNA, I can modify my diet and my environment to stop those genes from being expressed. Even though I'm predisposed to them, I can stop them from being activated, which is super, super interesting. So let's take acne, for example. So let's say I'm predisposed to acne and you're not. So if we look at all the things that can cause acne, like eating super oily processed foods and rubbing your face with dirty hands and build up of dirt on your face, etc., right? Those all cause acne. So if you do those things, you don't get acne because you're not predisposed to it. But if I do them, I will. But if I stop doing them, suddenly I don't have acne anymore. Even though we're both predisposed to it, if I stop all the things that can cause acne, I no longer have the potential to cause acne. So that same thing can be applied to diseases, to hair loss, to height, etc., which is super, super fascinating. So basically, how this works is if you look at your DNA like this, basically, this thing called a methyl group will bind on top of your DNA, which will basically prevent it from being read by whatever's reading the DNA, which means it won't be expressed and won't be acted upon. And apart from that, you can also see this chromatin, which is basically like a fibrous part of your DNA. It will color up this DNA, and you can see this, for example, this gene here. If it's covered up by these, it's inaccessible, so the gene is inactive. Compared to here, when it spreads out, the DNA is accessible and the gene is active. So it can condense up the fibers, making it unusable. And that combined with the methyl group up here can also deactivate the genes. So basically, you can turn off bad genes by modifying your DNA. And so you can basically remodel the chromatin from this to hide away the bad genes, and from this to express the good genes. And as well as that, you also get non-coding RNA. And if you've heard of RNA, maybe during like the COVID vaccines, uh, it's sort of like it's deoxy. It's basically like DNA. Just imagine it like DNA for the sake of this. So basically, you can the, the non-coding RNA. So DNA, it basically like something which doesn't actually code new genes. It will bind onto the DNA, or it will bind onto proteins or other RNA, and basically it will modulate the gene transcription. So again, the genes may not be transmitted or translated if the RNA doesn't attach to it. So basically, this can again be transformed to literally any bad genetic predisposition you have. So basically, it's got to do mostly with the biological mismatch. So with most of the topics I talk about on this channel, it all comes down to the modern environment and lifestyle causing damage to the natural systems that evolved to make us live optimally. So if you look at these two, like the left versus the right, you have a sunlight exposure versus artificial light. You have primal diet versus like high fructose corn syrup, disgusting chemicals and whatnot. You have low toxin load versus microplastics and endocrine disruptors. Low chronic stress versus chronic psychosocial stress, especially with cost of living, uni, bills, etc. You have microbial diversity from good whole foods, and then you have glyphosate and heavy metals like GMO foods, herbicides, animals fed GMOs. It's all shit, right? And so, what do you reckon happens to gene expression under chronic mismatch? Of course, the bad genes tend to activate themselves. So basically, the way that you make the good genes express themselves and the bad genes hide themselves is by living a proper healthy lifestyle. And so we're going to look at exactly what that looks like. And the first step of that is nutrition. So epinutrients, similar to epigenetics, are specific nutrients or compounds that influence your gene expression by regulating mechanisms such as this methylation, where the methyl group blocks out the gene, histone modification, which opens up these tails, which allows genes to be read versus cuts them off so they can't, leading to gene transcription. And this is just what it looks like, methylating something versus like a normal cytosine versus when it's methylated, so it can't be read. So this study on epigenetics, I'll just read the part that I highlighted. But yeah, it says nutrients can reverse or change epigenetic phenomena, such as DNA methylation, so what we were talking about up here, and histone modification, again, we saw that, thereby modifying the expression of critical genes associated with physiologic and pathologic processes, including embryonic development, so how you develop when you're in an embryo, aging, and carcinogenesis. So you can literally reduce your aging and your risk of cancer from these epinutrients. And yeah, in recent years, epigenetics has become an emerging issue in a broad range of diseases such as type 2 diabetes, obesity, inflammation, and neurocognitive disorders. So all these different issues can all be traced back to epigenetics, which can be traced partly to epinutrients. And so which nutrients are we looking at specifically? So all of the genes responsible for methylation, or the nutrients rather, are as follows: B2, B3, B6, B12, folate, choline, serine. I actually don't exactly know what serine is. I haven't heard of it, to be honest. And I remember searching up the sources and it seemed pretty vague online, so maybe do your own research on that. Glutathione, vitamin C, copper, magnesium, selenium, zinc. So obviously these are minerals. These are B vitamins, vitamin, choline, folate, serine, and glutathione. And so you have amino acids. And so you can read exactly what this does if you're interested, but basically these all are part of the process of methylation. And so which foods are high in these? It's foods part of the primal diet. For example, beef liver is a best source, here you go, of choline. I'll zoom out a bit if you can see. Choline, copper, selenium, vitamin A is in here, vitamin B2, B3, B6, B12, folate, so which is B9 obviously. So literally if you just look at this, and also it says zinc as well, so purely just liver, for example, which is part of the primal diet, you have copper, selenium, zinc, B2, B3, B6, B12, folate. You already have the majority of them just in 100 grams of beef liver. And you combine that with eggs, with choline, you combine that with other primal diet foods like in this image here, and you optimize your methylation, which optimizes your gene expression. So next we're going to get into some examples of epigenetics. So the first one is chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation is super, super bad. And the majority of modern people have chronic inflammation, at least over the age of 40. You can see here, chronic inflammation is the cause of most chronic diseases. And you know how chronic disease is the cause of most deaths nowadays. And yeah, these are some of the diseases: cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, allergic asthma, COPD, Alzheimer's, chronic kidney disease, and inflammatory bowel disease. So all of these terrible diseases are all caused by chronic inflammation. And these are some causes of chronic inflammation. So standard Western diet, high carbs, you have the chronic stress, dysbiosis, leaky gut, poor sleep, etc., etc. You can read this, right? So basically there's this pathway called the NFKB pathway, which it's a bunch of transcription factors that basically regulate the way your genes express in response to various stimuli. And basically the way that this is upregulated is through chronic stress, tissue stress, so intense exercise where you're damaging your tissues excessively, poor diet, obesity, sleep disruption. It feels like almost everything I talk about on this channel comes down to stress, diet, obesity, and sleep. Everything. Almost everything is just those four things. Here you have the tissue stress as well. And so, again, most of the modern world is chronically stressed, has a poor diet, has obesity caused by diet, and has sleep disruption, which then activates this pathway, which then can regulate gene expression to all these negative health effects and these chronic diseases. And so, yeah, the NFKB pathway has a critical role in immune responses, inflammation, cell survival, and yeah, it can lead chronic inflammation, autoimmune diseases, cancer. You can also have pro-inflammatory gene expression driven by this pathway, which then causes inflammation, which causes all these issues. And also oxidative stress, which again is caused by diet, obesity, sleep, and just chronic stress, as well as blue light can also cause ROS and a bad circadian rhythm. ROS just stands for reactive oxidative species, which is cells that are damaged due to oxidative stress. And so that can start altering your epigenetics again. It can upregulate this pathway. It causes hypomethylation, so it reactivates those genes that you've deactivated, which obviously is a bad thing. It reduces SAM, which is basically a methyl donor. So basically, it just screws with your methylation, which causes hypomethylation, again, underactive methylation, so triggering the genes you're trying to hide, causes histone hypermethylation, so it can permanently silence good genes as well, and also inhibits non-coding RNAs. And remember, those non-coding RNAs are important for epigenetics. And so, yeah, bad thing. Don't want it. Don't want oxidative stress, don't want inflammation, don't want NF-κB pathway upregulated, which is why you don't want any of these lifestyle effects. And so, yeah, if you have chronic inflammatory signaling, you alter your epigenetic regulation long term. And so, secondly, we'll look at hair loss, because it feels like everyone, every single male, or almost everyone, has hair loss. And this is obviously the chart. This is normal, healthy hair, and this is extreme hair loss. And one thing I want to point out is common is not the same as normal. Like, you see men with hair loss and you think, oh yeah, that's just what men do. But think about it for a second. Why would men just randomly lose their hair? Why? Well, why did that evolve? It makes no sense, right? And every other animal species, no animal randomly loses its hair when it gets to middle ages. Lions lose their hair like this, and this is only when they're in captivity, versus when they're in nature, they have a strong, healthy mane, and when they're in captivity, living in an unnatural environment with chronic stress, poor sleep, bad diet, where have we heard that before, they have hair loss, as you can see by this image here. And also, I didn't actually show this up here, but because I forgot, but if you look at, for example, Native Americans who live a much more natural lifestyle, they have long, thick black hair, no signs of hair loss, no signs of graying, all the way up until their 80s. So, and same as African tribes as well, who live naturally. And so what actually triggers hair loss specifically? So, chronic inflammation, which we just looked at, caused by stress, diet, sleep, obesity. Modern diet specifically, there are nutrient deficiencies, toxins, like what we're looking at above. You have soy, you have GMOs, you have pesticides causing inflammation, oxidation, hypoglycemia, which is like high blood sugar, causing ROS, altered methylation patterns, again, histone modifications, high stress, talked about it again. But there are some new ones for hair. So pollutants can actually get caught in your hair. Hair care products. So for example, like shampoo and conditioner can inflame or irritate your scalp. I'll make a separate video on this, but basically a lot of them have toxic ingredients, or they can strip the oils from your hair. Like, that's what shampoo does. It removes all the dirt, but it also strips all the oils, making your hair really dry, causing an overproduction, inflammation. You can get, like, if you have gel or whatever, it causes a buildup of the products in your hair. You can get chemical damage or breakage, hormonal disruption from endocrine disruptors in hair care, and also vitamin D. So you can see here, vitamin D, when your hair grows, there are 3 phases. Anagen is like the growth phase where it grows longer and thicker. And when there's a deficiency in vitamin D, the anagen phase shortens and pushes premature hair follicles into the telogen phase, which is the shedding phase. So you get excessive shedding and thinner hair. And vitamin D deficiency leads to hair loss. When there's no sufficient vitamin D, it affects the growth phase and results in androgenic alopecia and alopecia areata, which is male pattern baldness and autoimmune condition, respectively. And so this is just an image of the stages of hair growth. So again, this phase, the growing phase, will be shortened, the telogen will be rushed, and then you'll get to the exogen shedding phase very quickly, which is not what you want. And then, so when we look at this study here, it was this guy from Harvard, and this is about stress. So basically, the adrenal glands produce stress hormones, And so what his team did is they removed the adrenal glands from mice, and it led to rapid hair regrowth. The hair grew quicker than ever. Hair follicle regeneration didn't slow. The mice grew older and older, and the hair kept growing at the same speed. And the team was able to restore the normal hair cycle, i.e., cause the hair loss, by feeding the mice corticosterone, which is a cortisol equivalent, a stress hormone. Subjecting mice to mild stress over many weeks increased corticosterone and reduced hair growth. Hair follicles remained in an extending resting phase, which supports the role of corticosterone in inhibiting hair regrowth. Further studies revealed that it prevented the dermal papilla from secreting. This basically showed that if they reverse the side effects of what the corticosterone actually did, it stopped this molecule from being produced. When it put the molecule directly into the skin, they reduced the hair loss. Basically, just proving again that it is the stress, and it's caused the stress is what causes the hair loss. And again, obviously, most modern people are chronically stressed, which is why we have this going on. And now next is acne. I don't really suffer with acne, but I know a lot of people do. And so obviously, again, you can have predisposition like sebaceous gland activity, which is like your oily glands, and immune response variability. So for example, some people get rid of toxins through their skin, which is acne. Some people get rid of toxins through like urine or through their gallbladder or through the like stuff like that. And what triggers acne? Again, like we talked about before, you have insulin spikes, which is diet, sleep disruption, inflammatory diet, and stress. Where have we seen those before? And yeah, this is just how it works. So when you have a high glycemic load, so high carbs, you spike your insulin, which causes this chain reaction, which causes inflammation, hyperproliferation of sebum, which is the oil, which causes acne, right? And also excess IGF-1 activates this mTOR pathway, which increases acne again. You can see here, yeah, overactivated mTOR1 increases androgen hormone secretion and most likely activates signaling of sebaceous follicles. So again, acne. Epidemic acne is an mTOR-driven disease like obesity, diabetes, cancer, and neurodegenerative diseases. And FOXO1 links nutrient availability, increased protein synthesis, cell differentiation, etc. So basically, an increase of IGF-1, which is often triggered by insulin, can cause this cascade effects of acne. So again, diet, sleep, and stress. So let's just zoom out. This is basically what we're looking at. It starts off with environment and nutrition. So not only what you eat, but also how you live, your stress, your sleep. This will then influence your hormone production and your inflammation or lack thereof. This influences your epigenetic modifications, so what genes are expressed and what aren't. This influences gene expression, so actually what changes in the genes. And then this will then change your phenotype, so the actual physical manifestations of your environment, right? So again, this all comes back down to environment and nutrition. Sleep, stress, diet, obesity, all comes back to that. So realistically, your biggest health issues are not just bad genetics, but it's oftentimes biology operating in the wrong environment. So if you change your environment, you may be able to change a lot of your big health issues. Epinutrients, they're not magic. They're literally just inputs into a system to function as optimal level. The way I like to think about it is epinutrients and epigenetics in general is making the best of your genetics or living to your best possible potential. Because you might say, oh, it's over for me, I have bad genetics, but there's a lot you can do in a relatively short time just from optimizing your environment and nutrition. So yeah, if this video was helpful, that's good. Leave a like if you want to. I appreciate you watching if you're still here. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.